I want to read to you a passage of scripture this morning from Paul's first letter to the church of Thessalonica. One verse, but very powerful, of course, in its intent. Listen now for the word of God for you. Speak encouraging words to one another. The front of your bulletin has this quote, and it's the one that I begin my sermon with today. I found it is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folks that keep the darkness at bay. Gandalf the Grey in The Hobbit. A preacher from St. Andrews went to Hogue 2 weeks ago to visit one of his seriously ill parishioners, a guy by the name of Fred. As the preacher stood at Fred's bedside to pray, Fred began to choke, to gasp for air. He grabbed a pad, he scribbled a message, he handed it to the preacher, and he promptly died. The preacher slipped the note into his coat, intending to read it when things finally calmed down. 4 days later, when conducting Fred's funeral, the preacher remembered he was wearing the same suit he had worn to the hospital when he had visited Fred. He told everybody gathered there about the letter, saying that while he'd neglected to read it at the time, he was sure that Fred would want it read now. With heartfelt emotion, he unfolded Fred's note and he read these words, "Preacher, you're standing on my oxygen tube." Now, I love that story for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it describes a lot of people I know. You know them too. People whose fault-finding, whose critical words make you feel like you're suffocating. Everyone you know has an oxygen tube. It's in their spirit. Some people are alive. Their eyes just sparkle. Some people are just plain glazed over. There are some people who, when you're with them, they fill your oxygen tube. Their presence, their words just breathe life into you. When you're with them, your anxiety goes down, your trust, your hope goes up. There was a theologian named Gregory of Nyssa, one of the early church fathers from the 4th century. He painted this beautiful word picture of those kinds of people. At horse races, he said, the spectators shout to their favorites in the contest. From the balcony, they incite the rider to keener effort, urging the horses on while leaning forward and flailing the air with their outstretched hand. Now, while that's a very keen observation, it makes me think that Gregory of Nyssa spent a surprising amount of time at the horse track for an early church father. Nevertheless, he takes this image of spectators in the balcony and he goes on to say, I want to be doing the same thing myself for you, my most valued brothers and sisters. When you're competing in the divine race, I want to encourage you vigorously. I want to encourage you vigorously. Gregory is on to something. He's talking about the importance of being an oxygen tube filler for somebody else. Some people do that for you. They encourage you as you're competing in the race. They are your balcony people, Gregory says. But then you have some other people in your life, he says. They stick a pin in your tube. They take a deep breath and they start sucking the air out. They drain you. They are your basement people because they bring you down. They are the dream-squashing, fault-finding, slow air leaks in the oxygen tube of your life. Now, the truth is, there is a basement person that lurks inside every one of us, which is a truth that leads me to my first question of the day. Which word would those who know you best use to describe you? Are you prone to the balcony? Or are you prone to the basement? Our world needs more balcony people. So let us promise today to heed Thessalonians and to heed Tolkien. Speak encouraging words to one another. They keep the darkness at bay. As you know, tragedy struck the University of North Carolina campus this past Tuesday as a university professor was gunned down by a graduate student. On Wednesday morning, the entire front page of UNC's student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, was just a chain of text messages that were sent on campus as the crisis unfolded. Check it out. It went viral this week. It's very, very, very poignant. Here's what the front page said. Are you safe? Where are you? Are you alone? Guys, I'm so scared. I need to hear from you. Can you hear any gunshots? Please stay safe. Barricade the door, or if you can run and get to a locked place, do so. Stay calm. Stay safe. We love you. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I love you. What is happening? I hear voices and loud banging. I'm in class. Everyone is losing it. People are literally shaking. I'm going to flipping throw up. Please pray for us. Please stay where you are. Keep your doors locked. I love you so much. Are you home? Someone is already shot. It will be okay, my love. Just stay put. You have a whole community in the same boat with you. Are you hidden? This is the longest half hour of my life. I'm so scared to leave this closet. Do you hear shooting? Please let me know when you are safe. Hey, are you doing all right? This crap is scary. I love you. I'm safe, but I can see people running and I hear screaming. Get under the desk. Run if you can. Put stuff in front of the door. Please be careful. I'm scared. I'm so scared. Oh my God, I'm so scared. Someone's in my building. The police scanner says one person is down with no pulse. Are you safe right now? Are you safe? Please send literally anything. Can you call me? Are you okay? I wish I could just come and get you. Don't stop texting me. It was not by accident, I believe, that literally right before that news broke, I just finished reading these prophetic words from the author Glennon Doyle. A few weeks ago, she wrote, I went into my son Chase's class for tutoring. I'd emailed Chase's teacher one evening and I said, Chase keeps telling me this stuff you're sending home is math, but I'm not sure I believe him. Help, please. She emailed right back and said, no problem, I can tutor Chase after school anytime. And I said, no, not him, me. He gets it. Help me. And that's how I ended up standing at a chalkboard in an empty fifth grade classroom, staring at rows of shapes that Chase's teacher kept referring to as numbers. I stood shakily at the board while Chase's teacher sat behind me, perched on her desk, using a soothing teacher voice to help me understand the new way we teach long division. Luckily for me, Glennon says, I didn't have to unlearn much because I never really understood the old way we taught long division. It took me an hour to complete one problem, but I could tell Chase's teacher liked me. She used to work with NASA, so obviously we have a lot in common. Afterwards, we sat for a few minutes and talked about teaching children and what a sacred trust and responsibility it is to mold individuals who are kind and brave. And then she told me this. Every Friday afternoon, Chase's teacher asks her students to take out a piece of paper and write down the names of 4 children with whom they'd like to sit the following week. The children know that these requests may or may not be honored. She asked the students to nominate a student as an exceptional citizen in the classroom every week. All ballots are privately submitted to her. And every single Friday afternoon after the students go home, Chase's teacher studies those slips of paper and she looks for patterns. Who's not getting requested? Who never gets noticed enough to be nominated? Who had 1 million friends last week and none this week? Chase's teacher is not looking for a new seating chart or for exceptional citizens. Chase's teacher is looking for lonely children. She's looking for children who are struggling to connect. She's discovering whose gifts are going unnoticed by their peers, and she's pinning down early who's being bullied and who's doing the bullying. Glennon says, I think this is a brilliant love ninja strategy. It's like taking an x-ray of a class to see beneath the surface into the hearts. It teaches these little ones how to make friends, how to ask others to play, how to join a group, how to share their gifts with others. And it's a deterrent because every teacher knows bullying usually happens out of eyeshot. And often kids being bullied are too intimidated to share. But the truth comes out on those safe, private little sheets of paper. How long have you been using this system? I asked her. Ever since Columbine, she said. Every single Friday since Columbine. This woman watched Columbine knowing so much violence begins with disconnection. Most outward violence begins with inward loneliness. She watched that tragedy knowing that children who aren't being noticed will eventually resort to being noticed by any means necessary. So she decided to start fighting violence early and often and in the world within her reach. She retires this year after decades of saving lives. What a way to spend your life, looking for patterns of love and loneliness, stepping in every single day, altering the trajectory of our world by creating a lifeboat for those who are adrift in a stormy, chaotic sea. So I want you to do me a favor this week. As you walk around your life, I want you to look closely at the people in your house, your office, your unit, your classroom, the grocery store, your neighborhood. Who's struggling? Who seems distracted? Who seems disconnected? Let us heed Thessalonians. Let us heed Tolkien. Let us alter the trajectory of our world. Speak encouraging words to one another. They keep the darkness at bay. Speaking of, the ever insightful Nadia Bolz-Weber dropped an article recently entitled, "If Shame Could Be Bottled as an Energy Source, It Could Easily Replace Fossil Fuels." Recently, she said, I was talking with a friend of mine about the practice of keeping a diary. She's always written down the things that have happened in her life, what she really feels about her lovers, things she's done and thought that no one else knows. I said keeping the diary feels way too risky because I'd be afraid of someone getting a hold of it and then knowing the things about myself I would rather keep hidden. To which she was like, are you kidding me? You publish way worse things about yourself in your sermons than I write in my diary. Anyone in the whole world can get online and read about your damage. True, I said, but not the whole truth. That's the dirty secret of people who are self-revealing. On some level, it's like pleading to a misdemeanor so there's no felony on your record. It's a tightly controlled PR campaign that looks like it's the whole truth, but it's not. So I've been thinking about the hidden things in me, she said, the stuff where I'd rather die than have it come to light, the damage and sin and shame that I can't admit to and how that stuff is such a powerful force in my life that it's like a propeller. I think I'm not alone. Whether those wounds were inflicted by the sin of others or by my own sin, they keep me in motion because I try and make up for them, or try and convince myself and everyone else that they aren't there, or I try and get them healed by the love and attention of other people, even though none of that stuff ever works. But wow, it sure does keep me in motion. I think if shame could be bottled as an energy source, it could replace fossil fuels. And shame, she says, is what I was thinking about all week when I thought about the Bible story of the woman at the well, because I wondered what propelled her towards a well in the heat of the noontime sun and not in the cool of the morning when all the other women would be there. I think it's important to say that all we know is that the woman at the well had 5 husbands, and at the time, the man she lived with was not her husband. But we don't know why. We don't know why she'd been married so often. Maybe she was a teen bride who was widowed and passed along through a line of her elderly husband's older brothers, as was the custom at that time. Maybe she was divorced for being infertile. Maybe she was forced to be a concubine. Maybe she lured men into her trap, killed them after a year of marriage, and just kept getting away with it. Who knows? All I know, she said, is that no matter if the wound was self-inflicted or inflicted by others or some combination of the two, she had a wound like we all do. And maybe that wound made her want to not be seen by other women. We don't know why she was there at noon, but a safe guess is that maybe it's sort of like why I took my kids to the playground at weird off hours. Because while I wanted my kids to be able to play, I also wanted to avoid the other moms. I could never relax around them, so I thought it was best that I avoided them. Maybe the Samaritan woman wanted to fill her water jar, but also very much wanted to avoid the other women who would have been there at first light and whose native language was shame. Maybe she couldn't relax around them. Maybe she just didn't want to be seen, because sometimes being seen is painful, even if it is also the very thing we really, really want. And yet the whole plan of not being seen didn't work out for her. I imagine her lost in her thoughts, the heat of the noon sun pressing down on her, sweat stinging her eyes, and she makes out a figure sitting at the well. She takes a deep breath. She braces herself. She makes sure to not make any eye contact, which doesn't matter because for some reason, this figure starts talking to her. Not only does he chat with a woman, a big no-no, not only does he chat with a woman who is an ethnic outsider, a bigger no-no, not only does he chat with a woman who is an ethnic outsider who has had 5 husbands, there aren't enough no-nos for that one, but this is by far the longest conversation that Jesus has with anyone in all of the Gospels. All of that is amazing. But what struck me so deeply was how when Jesus offers her living water and she says, "Give me the water so I may not thirst," he goes straight for her wound. She says, "Give me the living water." He asks her about her husband. You want to stop trying to quench your thirst with things that will never satisfy? Then it starts with the truth, Jesus says, the naked truth of your original wound and your original beauty and every good and bad thing about you. You've heard it said, water finds its lowest point. Well, living water finds your lowest point. The living water offered by Jesus finds your lowest point. It finds your original wound, the thing that you spend so much energy trying to heal through all those insufficient ways. Bad relationships, bad religion, success, more graduate degrees, more therapy, more working out, trying to get your parents to finally love you, being a perfect parent because your parents sucked. My favorite detail of the story, she concludes, has always been that the Samaritan woman leaves her water jug behind. Oh my God, do I have some water jugs that I need to leave behind? So good people, she says, whatever that lowest point of you is, whatever the deepest wound, whatever the vilest sin, whatever the damaged thing in you is, the living water of Christ's compassion will find it. It can find it. It has found it. You can leave your water jars behind at communion today. And all this because in the heat of the moment and at the height of her sin, Jesus speaks an encouraging word to a wounded woman at a well. And his word kept the darkness at bay. Speak encouraging words to one another. They keep the darkness at bay. Our world, life itself, have a way of beating people up and sending the darkness crashing in. All kinds of people end up wounded. But words, your words, have the power to heal their spirit. I read this tidbit last week and found it to be so incredibly poignant. Deborah Tannen teaches at Georgetown University. She's a neurolinguist. She studies communication. She tells a story about her aunt, an elderly woman in her mid-80s. Her aunt met a man. The relationship kind of blossomed from friendship to love. She was telling Deborah about a conversation she'd had with this guy on the phone where she talked to him about a luncheon that she had been to the previous day with a friend. He was asking her about that luncheon, and he asked her, "So tell me, what did you wear?" Deborah said that her aunt, 85 years old, started bawling and said, "Do you know how long it's been since anyone asked me what I wore?" When you love someone, you notice, you care, you ask. Let us heed Thessalonians. Let us heed Tolkien. Speak encouraging words to one another. The small deeds of ordinary people keep the darkness at bay. A century ago, 103 years to be exact, Dr. Frank Mayfield was touring the Tewksbury Institute in Upper Massachusetts when on his way out the door he collided with an elderly floor maid. To cover up the awkward moment, Dr. Mayfield started asking her questions. "How long have you worked here?" "I've worked here almost since the place opened," the maid replied. "What can you tell me about the history of this place?" he said. "Well, I'm not sure I can tell you anything," she said, "but I could show you something." She led him downstairs to an area where there were bars on the windows. She said, "That's the basement where they used to keep Annie." "Who's Annie?" Dr. Mayfield said. "Well, Annie was brought here because she was incorrigible. No one could do anything with her. She'd bite, she'd scream, she'd throw her food at people. The doctors and the nurses couldn't examine her. I was only a few years younger than her myself, and I used to think, golly, I want to help her, but I don't have any idea what I can do. I mean, if the doctors and the nurses can't help her, what in the world can I do? I didn't know what else to do, so I just baked her some brownies one night after work. The next day, I walked carefully to where she was in the basement. I said, Annie, I baked these brownies just for you. I'm going to put them down right here on the floor. You can come get them if you want. Then I got out of there as fast as I can. She actually took the brownies and she ate them. After that, she was just a little bit nicer to me when I was around, and sometimes I'd talk to her, and once I even got her laughing. One of the nurses noticed this, and she told the doctor, and that's how it came about that when they wanted to examine Annie, I explained it to her, and I calmed her down, and I just held her hand, which is how they discovered that Annie was almost blind. No one knew. After they'd been working with her for a year, the Perkins Institute for the Blind opened. They were able to help her. She went on to study. She became a teacher herself. And Annie came back to Tewksbury to visit, see what she could do to help out. At first, the director didn't know of anything, but then he remembered a letter he had just received. A man had written to him about his daughter. She was absolutely unruly. Father had been told his daughter was blind and deaf and deranged. He was at his wit's end. He didn't want to put her in an asylum or an institution. So he wrote the institute to ask if they knew of anyone who would come to his house in Alabama and work with his daughter. And that is how Annie Sullivan became the lifelong companion of Helen Keller. When Helen Keller received one of her many awards, she was asked who had the greatest impact on her life. She said, Annie Sullivan. But Annie said, no, Helen. The woman who had the greatest influence on both our lives was a floor maid who kept the darkness at bay through her small, everyday deeds. A floor maid shined light to Annie Sullivan, who shined light to Helen Keller, who shined light for millions. You just never know. So let us heed Thessalonians. Let us heed Tolkien. Speak encouraging words to one another. The small deeds of ordinary people keep the darkness at bay.